Russia's war against Ukraine is starting to hit ordinary Russians harder than ever. People are cutting back even on basic food. Sales of milk, pork, buckwheat and rice have dropped by around 8 to 10% in recent months. According to Bloomberg, everyday life is getting more expensive and families are buying only what they absolutely need. At the same time, major sectors of Russia's economy are showing real stress. Retail is shrinking fast. Almost half of all shops that closed last quarter were clothing stores. The electronics market is also collapsing, with demand at its lowest level in 30 years. The car market is down too. Sales fell by almost a quarter because loans are expensive and prices for importing cars keep rising. Ukraine's drone strikes are adding even more pressure. Attacks on oil refineries and ports from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea have caused fuel shortages inside Russia. Gasoline prices jumped sharply in late summer, and although they eased slightly in November, some regions still face a shortage. The steel industry is struggling. Overall, steel consumption has fallen by about 14%. Demand in construction is down by 10%, and in machine building by more than 30%. The coal industry is going through its worst period in a decade, with the major companies cutting production. Russia's banks are also under pressure. The share of bad corporate loans has risen, and unpaid retail loans are now around 12%. Economic growth slowed to just 0.6% last quarter, far below expectations. The budget deficit in October reached almost 2% of GDP, and it may grow even further by the end of the year. Oil and gas revenues, Russia's main source of money for the war, have fallen by more than 20% compared to last year. Because of this, Russia's central bank was forced to cut its key interest rate to 17% to cool down the pressure on the economy. In short, more and more cracks are appearing across the entire Russian economy. Belgium's Prime Minister Bart Wever says the EU should be careful with its plan to use frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. In a letter to Ursula von der Leyen, he wrote that moving ahead too quickly could make it harder to reach any future peace agreement with Russia. Right now, the EU is discussing how to unlock about 140 billion euros of frozen Russian funds and turn them into long-term support for Ukraine. Most EU countries back the idea, but Belgium has been blocking it because a large part of Russia's money is held in Belgian financial institutions. De Wever believes that if Brussels pushes this plan too fast, the Kremlin might refuse to engage in any talks later on. The European Commission hasn't commented yet. A new legal proposal on how to use the frozen assets is expected this week, and it could become one of the EU's biggest decisions on Ukraine funding in the coming years. Russian drones over Kherson are not just attacking military positions. They are actively hunting civilians in real time. Ukrainian electronic warfare units have intercepted multiple drone camera feeds. And this video showed the same pattern again and again. A drone flying low, scanning roads and yards, looking into a parked car, or following a truck, or diving straight at a person walking outside their home. The picture freezes only at the moment of impact. Soldiers on the ground say the scale is staggering. On some mornings, they counted around 550 FPV drones targeting only Kherson and its district. And Russia keeps increasing production. In October alone, over 9,000 drones flew toward the city. More than 90% are jammed or shut down. But the remaining drones still kill and wound civilians every day. Local hospitals are full of people injured in these strikes, from FPV drones, from bomb drops by Mavic drones, and from larger Shahed blasts. Since July 2024, more than 200 civilians have been killed and over 2,000 injured across the southern regions. Nearly 3,000 homes are damaged or destroyed. The UN says these attacks deliberately target civilians and qualify as crime against humanity. And despite the danger, thousands of residents remain living under the constant sound of drones overhead every hour, every night.
Every day they beat civilians. It doesn't matter if it was a grandma or grandpa, going on bicycles or with strollers. There's video confirmation. In addition to FPV, there are Mavic reconnaissance drones that do the dropping of bombs. It doesn't matter. For example, a grandma is cleaning the garden. and they drop a bomb on her.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban is once again choosing Moscow over Europe. He says he's traveling to Russia to talk about energy supplies, crude oil and gas for Hungary, but the bigger picture is impossible to ignore. While Europe is trying to isolate the Kremlin for its war against Ukraine, Orban keeps the door open. He maintains warm ties with dictator Putin even as Russian missiles, drones and artillery continue to hit Ukrainian cities every single day. Orban admits that the war will probably come up during his talks with Putin, but the problem is how he talks about it. He frames the meeting as routine, almost normal, as if Russia isn't attacking a neighboring European country right now. For many EU states, this is not diplomacy, it's a security risk. Because every time Orban shows up in Moscow, he gives the Kremlin exactly what it wants, a friendly face inside the European Union, breaking the image of unity and weakening the pressure on Putin. Hungary is already blocking several key decisions in Brussels, including financial support for Ukraine and joint position on Russia.
The Americans have imposed sanctions on Russian energy companies. Not long ago, we were in Washington to obtain an exemption for Hungary from the sanctions. We succeeded in doing so, which is great. Now all we need is gas and oil, which can be purchased from the Russians. So, I am going there to ensure that Hungary's energy supply is secured for the winter and the coming year at an affordable price.
Russia's dictator Putin once again showed the same brutality and cynicism he has always had. A dictator responsible for thousands of deaths now pretends he wants talks while at the same time demanding Ukrainian surrender and threatening more attacks. Speaking to reporters, the Russian dictator claimed that the US officials want to meet him in Moscow next week. He complained about new US sanctions, blamed Washington for destroying relations, and even defended Steve Witkoff, the Trump envoy caught on leaked audio giving tips to Russian officials on how to influence the White House. Putin repeated the same old propaganda that Russia is open to talks, while at the same time threatening Ukraine and demanding full withdrawal from Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, including areas Russia doesn't even control. He wants Ukraine kept out of NATO and stripped of Western military support. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky responded clearly. Russia's war continues and Moscow is ignoring every serious attempt to end it. But he said peace will not be built on Russian threats. It will depend on the conditions the world creates to stop Russian aggression once and for all. Zelensky confirmed that Ukraine and US officials will meet again this week to return to Geneva points into a real plan. A plan that leads to peace and long-term security guarantees for Ukraine. He said Kyiv remains in constant contact with the US, Europe, and partners across the world.
The Russian war continues, and we all hear that Russia scorns the efforts of key global powers to truly end the war with a lasting peace. But whether there will be peace does not depend on Russia's threats or on whatever ultimatums it voices. It depends on the conditions the world ensures so that this aggression cannot be continued.
In Georgia, daily protests have now stretched on for months, ever since the government announced it was freezing the country's bid to join the European Union. That decision, made at the end of November 2024, shocked many Georgians, especially the younger generation, who see their future firmly in Europe. Since then, people have been gathering outside Parliament on Rustaveli Avenue and across the country, sometimes in the thousands, sometimes in smaller groups. What hasn't changed is the response. Police have used mass arrest, force, and a growing set of restrictive laws to try to slow the movement down. New rules now allow authorities to detain people for covering their faces, blocking roads, or even setting up small structures during rallies. For many protesters, these laws feel uncomfortably familiar, echoing legislation passed in Russia over the past decade to crush dissent. But Georgians are still coming out. The pressure isn't only on the streets. Political opposition is being squeezed too. The ruling Georgian Dream Party has asked the Constitutional Court to ban all three major opposition groups in the country. Several of their leaders are already jailed, in exile, or facing charges critics says are politically motivated. Opposition figures say the government is turning the country away from Europe and towards Moscow.
Ivanishvili is essentially fulfilling every single strategic objective that Vladimir Putin had vis-a-vis Georgia. that what he didn't achieve through war, through the 2008 invasion, he has achieved through electoral regime change in 2012 and thereafter, the results of which we're seeing much more clearly today, when Georgia's EU accession has been halted, Georgia's NATO accession has been halted, when Georgia is no longer a country that has any prospect of ever becoming part of the civilized world, and it's renegating back to being essentially a failed state in Russia's backyard.
That's all for now. For more content, please subscribe.